What we're going to talk about from this point on is the relationship between diet and lifestyle choices and the microbiome and all kinds of physical aspects of mental health and the relationship to mental health. And I don't want you to confuse this because I just got finished telling you that there's no chemical imbalance in the brain that causes this, but it's crystal clear that the way you live your life from a health perspective definitely influences your mental health. So if you're not drugged right now, some of the things that I'm going to tell you will make you feel better without drugging. And if you are drugged right now, some of the things that I'm going to tell you are going to help you to have a less terrible experience as you try to withdraw from the drugs. Now, interestingly enough, I love medical history. Dr. Campbell talked about that the other night, and I, like him, love reading medical history because what's interesting is we find out that these kinds of things have been known for thousands of years. They just haven't been well promoted. And the history of using food to address psychological disorders, it goes all the way back to Hippocrates, who promoted a healthy mind and a healthy body. And he taught that mental and physical health were interrelated. And indeed, if you look around the world, the rates of depression, anxiety, and psychosis is quite different in countries where people eat more of a plant-based, health-promoting diet than in westernized countries like the United States. Now, the only reason, it's not just the food. That's just one aspect of it. But when I started looking into this, what I was hoping was that I would find a little bit of information to support what I observed in our office, which is that people who were depressed and anxious often got better when they started eating well and exercising. I thought, gosh, I hope there's just a couple studies I can find out there. And instead, what I found was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them, and I'm just going to share a few of them with you here. The first thing is I stayed away from, the studies are pretty bad on individual foods and supplements and that sort of thing in terms of measurably improving mental health. And one of the reasons is when you think about it, a dehydrated, malnourished, sedentary, overweight, depressed person, I wish that we could fix things with magic pills. Oh, take this omega-3 supplement, it's going to fix all that. Does anybody here really think magnesium or omega-3 fats are going to fix all that? No, these are complex problems, and we need to approach them with a holistic, with a WH approach, which is what Dr. Campbell was talking about the other night. So I looked at stuff that, so the types of studies that addressed dietary patterns, and I just don't really want to tell people you can solve your complicated issues. I don't think marriages are repaired with dietary supplements. I don't think people who have bad relationships with family members are going to fix that. If you have a quick temper, taking magnesium probably isn't going to fix that. You're going to need more help than that. But the first thing is getting your body in good shape. And I'll tell you one of the reasons I think that this is so important. In addition to some of the things I've mentioned before, a lot of times when people are acting their worst is when they have the least amount of self-respect. And taking care of your body is an important move toward gaining self-respect. And I feel that very strongly. So I had to pick and choose. Like this presentation, like all of mine, could be all day. And Steve's got this little timer thing going, which I watch carefully. So I picked and chose some studies to illustrate the point. So a study of over 1,000 women, age range 20 to 93 years of age, women who ate a traditional diet, which was defined as vegetables, fruit, meat, fish, whole grains, they had a lower risk of depression and anxiety. And then the risk went up as women gravitated closer and closer to the standard American diet. A study of over 3,400 middle-aged people regarding diet and depression, participants at the highest quintile of whole food eating had the lowest risk of depression. Data from a prospective cohort study of over 4,200 UK civil servants showed that poor diet is a risk factor for depression in women. The healthier the diet, the lower the risk of depression. A study of over 1,100 adults aged 30 to 64 years of age, diet qualities significantly associated with symptoms of depression. And notice there are lots of references on these slides because this is easily verifiable in the medical literature, and I'm giving you just a smattering. A study of 9,700 adults with mood disorders. There was a consistent association between more nutrient-dense diets and better mental health. And this is a quote from the study. This detailed analysis in a clinically diagnosed sample was consistent with prior epidemiologic surveys revealing an association between higher levels of nutrient intakes and better mental health. Diabetes and depression are common comorbid conditions, and one of the reasons is it's kind of depressing to be a diabetic, particularly if your health is worsening. A diet with more vegetables, leafy greens, fruit, cooked whole grains, and whole grain bread lowered the risk of depression in type 2 diabetics. And diabetics who ate a more traditional diet with fried potatoes, cheese, red meat, processed meat, soft drinks, increased the risk of depression in type 2 diabetics. And there's actually a mechanism of action which I'll share with you shortly, and that's important. It doesn't matter what country you go to, you see the same thing. I think people living in Iran have a lot to be depressed about, but actually a study of Iranian adults showed that lacto-vegetarian diets were associated with lower incidence of depression in women, and people in the top quintile of healthier diet had a decreased risk of anxiety as compared to the bottom quintile. So even in a country where people have a lot to be depressed and anxious about, and women probably a lot more so than men, diet makes the difference. And the researchers, even quotes from the studies show this. Recommendations to increase the intake of fruits, citrus fruits, vegetables, tomato, and low-fat dairy products, and reduce the intakes of snacks, high-fat dairy products, chocolate, carbonated drinks, sweets, and desserts might be associated with a lower chance of psychological disorders. So it spans the globe. You heard a lot about the Seventh-day Adventists at this conference. A study of 138 of them, vegetarians had significantly fewer negative emotions than omnivores. And what was interesting about this is vegetarians consume less EPA, DHA, omega-3 fatty acid, arachidonic acid than omnivores, but it doesn't seem to matter. And I'm going to read this. Sometimes I read results from studies because I think they're impactful. These results challenge what is known about the link between dietary fats and brain function and suggest an unrecognized benefit of vegetarian diets which are naturally low in the long-chain omega-3 fats. And I mentioned this last night, that observations don't mean cause and effect relationships, and the fact that EPA and DHA intake are lower in the more plant-based or vegan diet doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything wrong, and this study seems to confirm that. So I think we have to be careful that we don't misstate what the science shows. We are unsure. There's absolutely no evidence to date that this causes a problem, and here's one study that shows that we might be jumping the gun to think that it does. There we go. 39 omnivores were randomly assigned to 3 diets. The control diet ate meat, fish, and poultry every day. A diet including fish 3 to 4 times a week and avoiding meat and poultry, and then vegetarian and avoiding all meat, fish, and poultry. Conclusion, restricting meat, fish, poultry improved moods the most. In other words, the closer you got to plant-based, the better it got. Those randomly assigned to vegetarian diets who were most anxious at the beginning scored lowest for anxiety after just 2 weeks, and the same was true with fatigue. Those most tired at the beginning scored lowest after 2 weeks. And so the interesting thing about this study to me was that even if the worse shape you're in, the more important it is to do this. Whereas some people might say the worse shape you're in, the more likely you might need to have some type of pharmaceutical intervention, which I don't agree with. The authors note that high intake of arachidonic acid, which is concentrated in animal foods, causes change in the brain that can negatively affect mood, and one of those changes is inflammation levels in the brain. That's also a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. A study in Puerto Rico, including 80 subjects between 27 and 70 years old, 2 groups, vegetarian and non-vegetarian. More anxiety and depression was reported in the non-vegetarian group. 18-week randomized controlled study with 292 participants eating a vegan diet. The vegan diet resulted in improvement in depression, anxiety, and productivity. Study of vegetarians, vegans, omnivores, and I'll read this quote, increasing restriction of animal foods. In other words, conversion from vegetarian to vegan is associated with improved mood. So the closer you get to more and more plant-based, the happier you're going to feel, for a lot of reasons. It'll make me happy, for one thing. And we all know it's all about me. No, I'm kidding. All right. Adolescents are profoundly affected. I mean, we have a big problem with adolescents, teen suicide. I've written a lot about what's wrong with our children from a mental health perspective, and some of it requires a societal fix, but there's no question that the food has an influence. A study of over 3,000 adolescents, 11 to 18 years old, subjects with poor dietary pattern developed more emotional and behavioral problems. They worsened over time if the poor diet was continued, but they got better if the kids' diets improved. Subjects with good diet at baseline had fewer psychiatric problems, but if the diet worsened, so did mental health. A healthy diet was defined as consuming fruits and vegetables and avoiding junk food. And in a lot of these studies, most of the people didn't eat perfect diets, they ate better diets. And that goes to something that I've talked about a lot at this conference, is that the better the diet is, the better off you're going to be. But I think it's important that we don't misrepresent the idea that smaller changes can result in profound differences in health. Data from almost 3,000 ethnically diverse adolescents showed an association between diet and mental health problems. Adolescents eating unhealthy diets, the highest quintile of eating processed and junk food, and less fruits and vegetables, were more than 2 times likely to have psychological problems than kids eating healthier diets. Case control study of 849 teenage girls. Consumption of ramen noodles, hamburger, pizza, fried food, and other processed foods increased risk of depression. Green vegetables, fruit, higher intake of fiber, decreased risk of depression. A random sample of over 5,000 Chinese adolescents looking at 3 dietary patterns: lots of snack foods, animal foods, and traditional. And places like China are great places to do these studies because you have the whole spectrum of diets ranging from just like the United States to very traditional. Higher intake of snacks and animal foods, higher risk and incidence of negative psychological symptoms. And adolescents in the highest quintile for the traditional diet had the lower risk of depression. Cross-sectional study of over 4,200 adolescents in New Zealand eating a healthier diet associated with better emotional health. Unhealthy dietary pattern, more negative emotions. Unhealthy eating pattern, soft drinks, unhealthy snacks, high fat foods, and sweets. The way that the average teenager in the United States eats, and unfortunately the way that the average teenager all over the world aspires to eat. You know, it's unfortunate, but of all the things we could export in this country, we've had to export the thing that is debilitating the population most, which is the Western diet. A prospective cohort study of over 20,000 women and their children. Higher intake of unhealthy foods during pregnancy was predictive of behavioral and emotional problems in kids. And women who eat a terrible diet postnatally, higher risk of behavioral and emotional problems in children. So it starts basically preconception and during pregnancy.